It's supposed to be the first introduction, visual introduction to a new subject, a new movie, a new title.
Because that's what the posters are supposed to do, is reach people emotionally in their hearts and excite them, inspire them, so that let's go see what this movie's about.
It's supposed to promise something, and sometimes that was the pivotal nature of the creative thinking. How do you give somebody something that they understand, but it's something they've never seen before? When I started working on Blade Runner, my first impressions were brought out as sketches just after seeing the film. We had all come to meet and know Harrison Ford. Here he was in this very different film, a very different role, and he gets beat up by replicants every 15 minutes, and yet he still has to be given a heroic status, at least from an advertising point of view. So I finally came about this image of Harrison Ford, holding the gun. Gritty, sweaty, a little bit film noir. I mean, even right down to the sort of Venetian blind lighting we were looking for there. I did the illustration for it, became the poster, and became part of one of the greater years for me in the film industry. Then the poster was still a very viable form of promotion and advertising for a film. Sometimes it was the first glimpse, the first idea that someone going to a theater had. Now, while it's still important, it no longer provides that primary form of advertising. So the function of the poster has changed, and in the process, the acceptance or rejection by the public of the poster has changed. Well, sometimes in the development of something like Blade Runner, the reference material was not necessarily terribly available. We ended up with Harrison Ford having a wonderful attitude, but no really good photograph of him doing that. I was able to acquire a frame of film, smaller than an 8x10, a little black and white, very rough, film grain, but I could pretty much see everything I needed to see, and that was the basis of reference for Harrison Ford. Now, I had my wife shoot a picture of my two hands holding a mock gun, and that was my reference material to begin painting. Now, the Douglas Trumbull miniatures and special effects for the city and for features, there were plentiful photographs of that, and I was able to get enough together to kind of make a composite view of the city as we saw it in the film. There were some great pictures of Sean Young smoking a cigarette. With the reference I had for Harrison Ford, I felt it was best to finish his face in oil. I was able to capture the likeness, the grittiness that was there, turn it in, and everybody was happy. In the 80s, and I would say before that in the 70s, and even on into the 90s, the international release of a film was kind of it was the bastard child of the whole film industry. I think it was before anybody realized what a great worldwide market there really is. Right now, the video market is kind of doing what the international market did some years back, and that is they're justifying their own graphic existence. And instead of staying with a branding kind of look, so something's the same, they'll justify their own existence by creating entirely new work for a product that is familiar, that they want people to respond to, and they'll market it quite separately. I'm not sure what that's all about, because I'm still a believer, and maybe this is very old school, the thing should look and feel the same from the very first you encounter it to the very last you remember it.
All I've really ever been able to do is paint and draw. What I do is I come up with concepts or designs, approaches, and pictorial explanations about what I feel about the film. And I'll do drawings. Sometimes they're little sketches this big, and other times they're larger, more designed, more finished. And sometimes I'll do one drawing, and I've done as many as 60 drawings until the committees decide what they like. And it's usually not, I like that one. It's, I like this from here, and that from there, and that from there. And once they get that to where they like it, they ask me to do the finish painting. And that takes, a couple of weeks to paint. And what comes of it is all the things that everybody else sees. It winds up on the side of buildings and on billboards and movie posters and T-shirts. And it gets a life of its own. And like in the case of Blade Runner, it just goes on and on and on. How I got it was probably just that. I was called because someone somewhere thought my work would be appropriate for the film. I think I was hired by the studio, as I recall. And I only did just the comprehensive idea. Whoever it was, the studio looked at it, they thought it was nice, they wanted one small change. I made the change, and I thought, because they were interested in making changes, they must be close to the finish. And then, of course, it never happened. They never used it for the movie. And subsequently, after a number of years, I started seeing it on book covers, and it's on the web now everywhere, and it was in magazines, and it was used all over the place. Actually, the original painting I never saw again. It disappeared. So, what was it, 3 years ago, I heard from Ridley's office that they were going to use it on his new DVD. I thought, wow, it's a 22-year-old idea. And I went back to the original, kind of looked at the concept and the composition, and then said, what's an improvement? So I used a little different portrait of Harrison, moved things around, but it still has the same look, but it's a little stronger, I think, a little more emotional. I put the rain into it and the neon, and I kept pretty much this color scheme that was in the original, because I like the dividing the picture down the middle and making one half warm and one half cool, because that was kind of the movie felt that way. I think I did one more drawing that redesigned it, and then painted the picture because I was so anxious to do the thing. Finally, 23 years later, I get to paint a picture for a movie I already love now and know so well. But it took, once I designed it, however long that took, it took about 2 weeks to paint the picture. But this one I did out of love because it wasn't a commission. I just did it because this situation arose, and I just had to do it. Finally, I get to paint the finished painting. So it was a labor of love. So I don't recount exactly how long it took, but that's generally how long most of the paintings take. It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 25 years, and 3 years later. That's how long it took.
The digital realm has opened up tremendous possibilities in terms of image making and image editing, but it's also given people a chance to screw up and fix it. We didn't have that many chances to screw up and fix it. You had to be pretty straight and narrow and very committed and very careful and very, very thorough and methodical about how it's done, and yet it had to be fresh and artistic. Well, that's a hell of a demand.
That takes an artist, all the things that make an artist, from his education to his heart. Our job isn't just to imitate nature, it's to bring something more and something more in depth and design and idea and feeling into a picture than just framing nature. So, I mean, I'd like to think that what I do is look into a person's soul, not just frame his face.
That's a very special kind of creativity. It's also a kind of creativity that's no longer as important as it used to be. Photoshop's marvelous. It's a wonderful, wonderful product. It is a different process. You can cut and paste here without having to go back to, the negative and do that and mix this and retouch that and all that kind of stuff. It's wonderful. At the same time, it eliminated what conventional art always produces, and that is an original. There is no digital original. It's a file. It's a set of binary numbers on a disk somewhere.
What happened to the art? Hopefully they'll get over it and realize it's just another tool. But it has changed things, because now they put the power of manipulating images into anybody's hands. So now, for the ignorant, they think that that's all there is to it. That's
a serious contrast to making a piece of artwork from a blank canvas into something that ultimately becomes a poster that someone wants to buy and collect and have and hold.
And so I think it's a pity if the posters are losing that, but maybe the computer images will get better and they'll be more artful and start to reach people in their hearts again.
I very rarely do movie posters anymore because I really don't want to engage the mechanism of marketing and market research. So now as a fine artist with limited editions and originals, I paint pictures about the movies, and people seem to love it.
One of the most controversial aspects of the picture has always been the question of whether Deckard is indeed a replicant or a human being. What is more off-putting and upsetting and disorienting to be someone going after something you think is dangerous and really something that should be destroyed, and then finding out at the end of your quest that you may be that thing yourself?
What would that be like? What is that like? I mean, to imagine that as an adult or a young adult, you find out that everything you thought was yours isn't yours, and that you're not only not who you thought you are, you're not what you thought you were. The subtext of the movie, is working on these kind of really Jungian archetypal levels.
Everybody was discovering themselves, and that's what the theme of the film was. And be aware of what you'd find out about yourself. That's all I gotta say.
I'll never understand why Blade Runner fans refuse to believe that Deckard is a replicant, because there's all sorts of clues dropped in the films. Of course, the unicorn is the biggest one. That it's Exhibit A, because it's the strongest piece of evidence that we have.
I want to see what's inside his head, so it better be something extraordinary. So he is a romantic because he's thinking about this unicorn.
And what I wanted to do, I wanted it to work like the thoughts of his. So he would pick up a photograph, he would then start looking at it and remembering, and you'd see this unicorn running through the forest coming towards you. It'd come right up to camera and it would shake its head. And as it shook its head, I cut to him shaking his head, like shaking that thought away.
And so that at the end of the film, I can have something absolutely remarkable, which I can illustrate, which is a unicorn. And he goes like that, boom. How would anyone have known what was inside his head other than someone who knew what was in his file that had been implanted in his brain? Can't be any clearer than that. If you don't get it, you're a moron.
That's not his recollection. How on earth would that be his memory? It's not. He's thinking about Rachel. He's thinking about her implanted memories. He's thinking about her implanted fantasies. In terms of myth, that is totally a female myth symbol. And at the end, when Gaff leaves the little unicorn, that's not about, oh, Deckard, I'm wise to you, you're a replicant, I know what's in your head. It's Gaff's little grace note, to Deckard, saying, you know what? I think they're as human as anybody else, and if you're falling in love with her, go for it, man. Run. Get her out of here.
Eyes and seeing are a huge, huge theme in the movie. There is a characteristic glow that all the replicants have in the movies. They have a very subtle golden glow in their eyes. It appears, very briefly in some cases. And Deckard has this glow in his apartment, in his eyes.
When I saw that red shit in his eyes, I said, give me a break. No, please don't. And Ridley's tricky. I think probably that was Ridley's. Fuck, it's got to be Ridley's decision. I said, well, no. And he said, they did that, Leave me alone, Hampton.
I had the great fortune of having a dinner with Ridley in France a couple years ago. And I'd always wanted to ask him this question. So I finally asked, was Harrison Ford's character a replicant? And he said, yeah. He was. And for me, to this day, the hair goes up in my arms. If you're even half-assed engaged in that film, you get the idea very early on that this guy may not be what he thinks he is.
He could be an Nexus 5, he could be a Nexus 7, he could be the newest one. He could have possibly been made last. After the replicants escaped off-world and ended up on Earth, why not, create one to go and hunt them all down? Because, once again, replicants are created for demeaning and degrading and dangerous work. Well, I would consider having to hunt down and retire sentient beings degrading and dangerous work.
There are also subtle clues that people sometimes catch and don't catch that Ridley Scott put into the film, I think purposefully, to lead us down that path of supposition. For instance, the photographs that are scattered all over Harrison Ford's piano, Deckard's apartment. The replicants collect photographs, and his whole The place where he makes music, where he obviously goes to relax, is filled with pictures of the past, memories, the same things that the replicants are trying so desperately to hold on to, even if they're not theirs.
There seems to be a kind of amnesia. He has an amnesia. There's things that he can't quite reach in his emotions, and I think that comes across.
I like what Ridley did about him being a replicant. I don't think it necessarily interferes with the subtext, because you weren't answering a question, you were asking a question. What is it that makes us different?
By the moral position of the movie and the ethical position of the movie, is that most of the world is far worse than replicants, because replicants are superhuman in the way they feel. The way their emotions are is also enhanced. It's not just their physical prowess or the intensity of their emotions is far greater than that of humans. So if Deckard is not a replicant, it's his loss, actually.
The story really only works if Deckard is human. The entire theme of the movie, which is very sophisticated, unravels. The theme of the movie being the journey of a man rediscovering his humanity. And he goes through all this moral confusion, and he comes out at the end of it a real human being again. There's a very strong thematic point being made. And if Deckard's a replicant, it's like, all that's gone. So I completely reject that.
I always sort of saw Blade Runner as a love story anyway, you know. That he's willing to be in love with somebody like Rachel, knowing that she's a replicant. And his humanness, I think, is really important in that.
Deckard, you know, is basically a guy who does his job, who doesn't particularly like his job. He finds elements of it distasteful, but he gets on and he does it. But the idea that suddenly he falls in love, I mean, it's powerful. And I think by taking that away, it kind of muddies the water.
Whenever I thought that I was possibly being positioned as a replicant, I would seek out Ridley and argue against it.
We're throwing pebbles into that world of that he was a Cylon, but he was a replicant.
Because it was my notion that in context of this world, the audience needed an emotional representative on screen that they could depend on being a human being.
Maybe it's the one holdout that I don't want to know about. And I'm sure Ridley told me at some point, I conveniently forgot it. So that I can have that as one dangling piece of guesswork. Mystery is fun.
It doesn't really matter, even, that you would actually say Harrison's a replicant. It doesn't matter. That's how strong this film is, because it still tells you the same story. You can't destroy this movie. That's the weird part.
One of the greatest things about film is that everybody can put in their own interpretation, so I'll leave it up to the viewer.
I often get asked if Deckard's a replicant, but I think you've got to make up your own mind. That's what's intended with the film. It's your choice.
So when people ask me, is he a replicant, isn't he? To my way of thinking, the only correct and proper answer is maybe.
I went to see Blade Runner. It was in Las Vegas, of all places. I came out and I kept looking at the sky and looking at the neon signs in Vegas, and it was different. It was, my life changed.
I thought Blade Runner seemed like a film that didn't come out of Hollywood. When you think that, it's just a few years after Logan's Run, and it's like something's happened, big change. And it's not just the effects, the whole aesthetic of the film, what Ridley brought to it. The sets and the The mood and the lighting and the confidence in the vision of the future. I mean, it's just absolute there. There's no uncertainty about what they're trying to tell in that film at all.
You just wanted to live there. I mean, ostensibly it was this really dystopian universe, but of course it was unbelievably inviting and like intoxicating, and I just wanted to live in that future. I started to, literally kind of decorate my apartment and light my apartment, trying to make it feel more like Blade Runner. It was incredibly sexy and punk and cool.
There was something so magical and strange. I'd never seen anything quite like Blade Runner. It's very thematically dense. There's a lot of concepts of the metaphysical in there, what it is to be human, our memories as artifacts of being human and whether or not they're even reliable, these sorts of things. Didn't understand them at the time, but they were there. They became sort of like permanently burned into my psyche.
We had one day off a week, and I remember going by in the afternoon and seeing a poster for Blade Runner. I had no idea what it was, no clue of what I was going to see, but I went that night to see Blade Runner. It was one of those things where you just sat for, X amount of time in the chair and just went like, oh my God. My next day off, a week later, I went and saw it again. The next day off, I went and saw it again. I couldn't get enough of it.
I remember that I loved the way it looked. I remember loving the future, but I remember it was so scary that I actually was thrown off that movie, and I couldn't get into it really until I was a teenager. Like if you're a kid trying to watch Blade Runner and you see some woman trying to strangle Harrison Ford with her legs, this is not a movie that a kid naturally goes, wow, I want to be Harrison Ford.
It being an R-rated film, I was, forbidden to see it. So I didn't see it until my sophomore year in high school, which was 3 years later. And I just remember being, mesmerized by that film.
There was so much to see that I had to see it again. And I thought, well, I just can't wait till there's more that comes out, there's more that's revealed. Because there was such layering by Ridley Scott in the design and what he put in the film that you're just drawn into. You just want to watch it again. You want to see things from different angles. So the frame of the camera was just art itself.
I saw it at a very crowded theater right after it opened, and people were really excited, and Jazz going in. They're kind of mumbling and grumbling on their way out. It isn't really a popcorn movie. It kind of tries to be a popcorn movie at times, but I could tell that it was a film that was going to last.
It was so different. It wasn't Star Wars. It wasn't E.T. It wasn't anything that we really had seen like that, and I was just taken back, blown away.
As a kid, I knew artistically there was something to really be excited about, but I also kind of was affected by other things. And I feel really good that I saw it as a kid because I got into the Harrison Ford character, I got into the Rick Deckard character tremendously, because I wasn't really looking for lighting and sets and costumes. So I got into the story first, and then as an adult I grew up to appreciate everything else.
The very first time I saw it, I was a little ambivalent about it. I've asked myself, what is it about the movie that kept me at a distance the first time? And I think that my answer would have to be this. The brilliance of what Ridley did with the scale of it and the production design of it disguised the fact that there was a very compelling story there. In other words, it was like getting a huge gift-wrapped box with a giant bow and all this stuff hanging off of it, and you opened it up, and the gift is like this big. It's not that the gift isn't precious. It's just like the two didn't quite, match. And it wasn't until the movie started to show on cable, probably by the third time I'd seen it, that ambivalence had just blossomed into this passionate love for the movie.
I can't say I knew immediately that this was a masterpiece. I did not. I thought it was an interesting film. I thought it was a strong film. I thought the visuals were amazing. But the voiceover really bothered me, and it didn't make me think that this was like a film for the ages. But I changed my mind.
Every Blade Runner fan you meet is as obsessive as you are. You never meet a casual Blade Runner fan. You always, every single one who's a fan, because they either love or hate the movie. People either love it or hate it. And everyone who is a fan is an obsessed fan.
This is an amazing piece that's in my office at home. I just brought it down to show it to you. Ooh, how cool is that? This is so superbly detailed. The likeness of Edward James Olmos and Harrison Ford are they're just amazing. The little screens, you know, in the dashboard light up and everything. So, you know, just to make myself happy, sometimes I just turn on the lights and watch it for a while. That's, ladies and gentlemen, the kind of geek I really am. You heard it here first.
I love this movie so much, I was willing to commit the flesh of my entire left arm to it. I wanted the tattoo more than any other collectible. For me, because I wanted that more than anything because it was something only I could have. And that's what we do with cinema that we love. We geek out over it, and we find ways of becoming the ultimate fan. You know, I'm a bigger fan than you because I have more stuff than you. Well, I'm the ultimate Blade Runner fan because I have the Blade Runner tattoo. I don't know anybody top that.
In '82, in June, you could go down to your local newsstand and pick up the Blade Runner official souvenir magazine. On this table is actually the most important parts of my collection, and this is one of the police license plates. This is an actual original 35mm film print trailer. This is what I guess I call the teaser trailer. It's not the trailer that most people are familiar with. This is actually a shirt that Harrison Ford wore as Rick Deckard in the film. This shirt, you will remember, is primarily from the Zora chase scene. This V in the back, you cannot see this on film. It's a small little thing, but for the obsessive fan, it's like, wow, there's a little aspect I never saw before. But even all the detail that was put into all of this stuff, it's all stitched together by hand, so it's pretty amazing. This is the original shirt.
It's been very difficult as a Blade Runner fan to obsess over merchandising and collectibles. It's certainly not like Star Wars. It's hard to find stuff from the movie.
Once you bought the posters, there's only photographs, and so then I started buying photographs, and then I started creating replicas of things. This card is, I believe it was a Sid Mead design, a fellow I knew. I can't imagine the time spent, but he actually created this, it's solid resin blaster that did not appear in the film.
The community has actually grown not only through fan sites like Blade Zone and a few others that are out there, but there's discussion groups out there. There's prop sites that discuss props from the film. The internet has just brought so many people that have the same interest together.
It's the largest Blade Runner website in the world. I kind of think of it as almost a museum, a visual museum that people can go to and see what is happening with Blade Runner.
The first image that struck me in Blade Runner was actually the opening sequence. There's a huge proscenium shot of the city, and it's just so massive and so beautiful and so big and so dark. And I felt like with every car that raced across the screen, I was spiraling into that world.
I'm really struck by the beginning with Leon, getting the replicant test, because that moment really defines the movie in a lot of ways for me, because it says that these are people. They're so close to human beings that you have to sit them down and do this exhaustive test, and that there's only the slightest sort of fraction of a difference in their reaction between you and I. I thought that was a really interesting and elegant way to open the film.
It's your birthday. Someone gives you a calfskin wallet.
The Voight comp test in Tyrell's apartment with Sean Young, is just breathtakingly beautiful on every level, every shot. The thing that I'm continually stunned by is the lighting of the film and the look of the film and the way that the production design and wardrobe and lighting form this kind of exquisite, perfect kind of union, this new thing. They just dovetail together so beautifully, but it's really how sophisticated and undated that lighting is.
Ridley Scott had this amazing lighting style. He didn't light like a normal person. He realized that the space of a movie screen is not three-dimensional. It's an illusion of four, actually. You have three-dimensional space, but the reality is to get anything moving in perspective, all you have to do is move something across the screen. Like right now, I'm moving across your screen, and even though it's lit well, you don't really need to do that. All I have to do is wave my finger, and you can automatically see 3D space, which is really hard to do on a two-dimensional surface if you're using conventional forms. So Ridley realized that the light in every shot isn't just 3D space, it's four-dimensional. So he constantly moved that light. Almost every frame, there's a light streak going on. Even a close-up of like him picking up a little scale has a little lighting going underneath the arms and stuff like that. That level of complexity in terms of fleshing out the world is what made it so real. There's just a certain sense of life that most filmmakers don't even sort of touch.
I always loved all of the exterior scenes. I really always loved the street scenes, the lights and the neon and the chaos. I thought it was beautiful.
Here's a character, here's a hero I've never seen before. He's a bit of a loser, he's an alcoholic, and he gets beat up by just about everybody. It was really, really cool, and I felt like this guy isn't Indiana Jones, this isn't Han Solo, this is a real guy.
And I just remember being just so taken by the eccentricity and the quality of the characterizations, particularly, Roy Batty, Rutger Hauer's character. His crushing Tyrell's head, I remember being so unnerved by that scene. Because here he is looking into the eyes of his maker, and yet he's more powerful and able to destroy the very thing that created him.
What was brilliant about Hauer's performance is that at some point he obviously realized that he's a 4-year-old. And so he played brilliantly a being that was incredibly sophisticated, incredibly intelligent, had these magnificent experiences, and yet perhaps had the emotional experience of a 4-year-old child. And that's a very interesting challenge for an actor that he played really fascinatingly.
I think the ending is the strongest thing. That's why it's so memorable, because I've always been in favor of thinking that, the villains, quote unquote, are far more interesting than the heroes. And Roy Batty is an absolutely beautifully realized antagonist.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Just as a writer, hearing the Tears in Rain speech is like getting smacked. It's like, hey, try to do something this good. Bam! It's like, ow, it's so good. To take what could have been 3 pages of monologue and boil it down to essentially haiku is very humbling for a writer to be hearing, because it's so damn good. Rutger Hauer had a lot to do with it. David Peoples had some, it was a good collaborative thing that resulted in that. That's an amazing scene, and Rutger Hauer just played the hell out of it. I mean, my God. But I particularly love the character of Gaff. There's a whole lot more story going on with Gaff there than the movie shows you. In other words, it's telling you a lot about that guy. He's sort of like the Greek chorus of the movie, right? You get to read a whole lot into Gaff with a very few simple brushstrokes. I mean, if you look at the movie from Gaff's point of view, there's a hell of a lot going on. He knows a lot. He's intuiting a lot. And in fact, he has this whole emotional trajectory in the movie that reflects Deckard's, Harrison Ford's. It's a magnificent journey that the story takes us on.
It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
Blade Runner was single-handedly responsible for dragging science fiction film out of a kind of glossy, implicitly utopian vision of the future into a very fundamentally suspicious and degraded and dystopian image.
The dystopian future was the end of civilization,
Post-Blade Runner, the dystopian future was the triumph of civilization. It was covering every single square inch of the Earth with asphalt and electronic screens. It was pollution in the sky, and that's all Blade Runner.
Before then, maybe people didn't really want to, didn't look at it like that, didn't find beauty in grime, didn't find beauty in the kind of steam from the dry cleaners, didn't find beauty in the rain in the gutter.
The moment I saw that rain, that's it, I want rain. The rain, which was an element that people associate very much with the feeling of noir. I think it was taken to an extreme on Blade Runner. I'm sure that Fincher would beat the crap out of me, but I think the rain in Seven comes from Blade Runner. Certainly the rain in all my movies comes from Blade Runner.
I don't know that there's been a film, especially in terms of its design, that's been more heavily cribbed or just flat out ripped off than Blade Runner. You see it. You've seen it in films the last 25 years. You've seen that, rain, dark. You see it in The Crow. You see it in Seven. You see it in these films. You see it in The Matrix. I see absolutely the influence of Blade Runner in the Matrix films.
Would there ever have been a Matrix without Blade Runner? I can't even imagine that we would have ever gotten to that point in the sci-fi genre where cyberpunk would have ever even happened the way that it did without Blade Runner.
Everyone has copied Ridley Scott. Everyone has done it. How many times since then have you seen some big spinning fan blade with shafts of light coming through a smoky room? That was very cutting edge stuff and very unique stuff. Shooting in these smoky environments made for a very cool effect. My God, it became a visual cliche.
One of the things that I remember of the movie too that is absolutely, you can see it on every movie now, on every genre, on every TV, animation, everything, is the zoom in sequence.
Some of the stuff that happened in Blade Runner were in movies before, but it was never done to the degree that Ridley did. So now whenever I see light streaming through blinds, I think that's a Blade Runner shot. If you see a car and it comes through in the dark and there's a flare, and it's spherical or anamorphic and it's like approaching the camera and it flares out our lens for a bit, you go, oh, that's a Blade Runner shot.
Blade Runner affected how I make films or make images or put images together, not so much in respect to its genre and the fact that it was science fiction, as much as a all-consuming, all-obsessive approach to the detail of creating an immersive experience. And science fiction or a period film, because in a way it is a period film, it's just the future, lends itself to creating a fully immersive experience. It's really in what secretly probably most people go to movies for, is to just be transported fully. You don't want to ever watch it and go, oh, that wouldn't happen, or gee, what am I going to have for dinner later? You want to be so immersed and engaged. And Ridley does that better than almost anyone has ever done it.
I borrowed from every favorite film and everything I've seen to, help me bring a better vision to the characters that I was writing and drawing to life. It is in the movies and some of the things that these fantastic and wonderful directors and writers have done that help us define what a hero is or what a hero is not, what a bad guy is or what a bad guy is not. The cool thing about Blade Runner is there was the fine line between who's the bad guy here and who's really the hero.
There's an elegiac quality to the replicants, their search for their creator, the sense of their mortality, pressing in on them. It was a spiritual quest at the center of Blade Runner. It wasn't just about, pursuing robots through the streets and blowing them away. As we were approaching Galactica and talking about the Cylons, I was very struck by those sorts of themes that we wanted to do. That, Rutger Hauer's portrayal was really sort of a guidepost for us in a lot of ways, because he is, at the same time, he's dangerous and sexy and completely tragic. I loved the combination of those three qualities into his character, and as we developed the Cylons, those sort of things were always sort of in the back of our heads.
Blade Runner is one of those films that has just insinuated itself into every level of the culture. You go to Times Square today, and you walk through Times Square, and it is a clean version of Blade Runner out there.
Tokyo at night is a startling sort of like, is this part of the movie? That city is sort of Blade Runner writ large, really.
A lot of things that they designed back then actually came true. It's like, here it is. You know, you get the flat screen TVs. They had a flat screen in Deckard's apartment. The DNA, the genetics, the cloning. You know, we're getting closer. You know, they've done animals now. So we have the electric sheep. We have the anemoid roe. It exists today.
Well, for a film that's 25 years old, for its impact to still be kind of rumbling through the culture, it's still, I think, an important, alive influence today.
It's one of those films that may never get replicated again because the amount of balls it took for a filmmaker to push that level of perfection, I don't know. I just don't think in conventional filmmaking it can be done with the way the studios and everybody's afraid of, you know, spending too much money and all that other stuff. It took a madman to do it.
It's pure cinema. You know, it's unadulterated, uncut film.